Just outside of our window, there's an apartment complex with a small parking lot, and there's one truck parked there that you can't help but notice. It's got a decal across the tailgate with an American flag and text that reads, "I'm a patriot, and if you don't like it, then go f*** yourself." I just have a question. How does that hit you? Are you like, hell yeah, this guy really loves this country and I'm here for it? Or do you feel other emotions? Because I have like a whole heap of thoughts and ideas about this, and I'm gonna lay them down for you here because I grew up in small town, conservative, religious Oklahoma, and as we'll soon see, I speak from painful experience when I say, patriotism is not what this guy thinks it is. Hi, I'm Bobby. I talk about social stuff and filmmaking and whatever other garbage I feel like here on the internet, and I'm so glad that you're here. Feel free to take a look around and don't forget to subscribe and like this video if you're into the vibe that we're cultivating and feeling out as we go along here together. We had a really fun time in the last video talking about a particularly infamous apologist, and I'm sure that he's still grilling Emma Thorne. Jeez, dude. Lay off, man. Where was I? Oh yeah, pickup truck guy. You know I keep it cool. Where I grew up, the city hall is a tiny yellow building that stands beside a river. It smells like fish, which is a good thing if you like to fish. I really don't, but I associate fishing with good times with friends, so I'm just letting it slide. Outside of the building, the 10 Commandments are posted beside one of a handful of parking spaces, and inside, the Christian flag sits opposite the American flag. Nothing was weird about that to us. The American flag stood opposite the Christian flag in the church that my parents took me to when I was growing up. This was normal. Now, with very few exceptions, I love all of those people, and they were very good to me growing up. There were so many people for whom integrity and principle were held in the highest regard, and it was there that I was taught so much of what I consider to be the best parts of my character. Also, I had to stick my hand up a cow's ass, and I'll never forget that. And to this day, I still call upon the lessons I learned from that culture of hard work, dedicated friends, and civic responsibility. But it was a very conservative place, and it wasn't until 9/11, when I was still really young, that I started to become aware of some of the consequences of this ideology.
The United States military has begun strikes against al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
The military suddenly became a prominent topic of conversation as the war on terror loomed in all of our minds. Fox News was a thing now, and Sean Hannity seemed like a really reasonable guy. And in this tiny town of around 500 almost exclusively white Christian people, many of whom were retired, I heard all about how evil Islam was. We had classes on it in Sunday school. I remember going to Wednesday night Bible studies and hearing about how Islamic teachings created terrorists and monsters, and how they hated America for some reason other than that we oppress them and discriminate against them and manipulate their governments. Hey, real quick, I need to clarify that Islamic extremism is bad. My point, though, is that Islam doesn't have a monopoly on religious extremism. After all, I'd wager there aren't many Muslims in the KKK. What I mean to call attention to here is that we often claim to be a country of religious freedom here in the US, when what we really mean is that we have the freedom to be Christian. I personally don't assume you're Westboro Baptist if you describe yourself as Christian, and I think that we have the responsibility to extend that benefit of the doubt to Muslims as well. I learned that the best thing that we could do to fight them, especially after the 9/11 attacks, was to get good jobs, work hard, make a lot of money, sell our souls to robber barons, and buy as much useless shit as possible.
I encourage you all to go shopping more.
Because it made the neighbors jealous and the economy stronger. And it definitely would not make you happier, though. It's just that you're a patriot. What else are you gonna do? America, but I do love this small purses, handbags, fanny packs, and wallets. I love all of it, and you know that designer clothing made under heinous and inhumane working conditions is what made this country great in the first place. I'm gonna pump my hard-earned savings into the American economy because guess what? It is my sworn and patriotic duty to make sure that mega corporations thrive and are swollen like mammon-stuffed ticks. Mama, pass me that credit card. I'm gonna buy me a PS2 for the war effort. Because it's 2002. By the way, the philosophy that gives any amount of selfishness a pass by reframing greed as a moral imperative is called objectivism. And if you want to feel really queasy about American economic policy in the early 2000s, then why don't you read Ayn Rand for a start? She wrote that the study of morality only serves to show us what is in our own self-interests, so that we may then pursue that self-interest to its fullest extent, and that is the only way to secure happiness. Patriotism, noun. The quality of being patriotic, devotion to and vigorous support for one's country. My idyllic upbringing got complicated as I grew up and started to examine my beliefs. I was working in churches, going to a Christian college, touring in evangelical bands, and trying my best to live out the Bible as honestly as possible. I hated having to constantly compromise Jesus' teachings to satisfy my perceived obligations to kin and country. Jesus' crucifixion was all sufficient, and to lay down your life for your faith was the greatest thing you could aspire to. But in order to get the chance to make that sacrifice, you'd probably have to pick up a rifle and kill some unbelievers first. It was a constant fight to push back the cognitive dissonance because I was raised to believe that Christianity and patriotism were completely inseparable. Maybe you could be a patriot and a non-Christian, but you certainly couldn't be a Christian and not believe in American exceptionalism. And so, as I grew up in the 2000s and 2010s, I started to become disillusioned with the politics and identity in which I'd been raised. The recession was raging in 2008 when Barack Obama was elected president, and I was 20 years old, and at that time, I was having serious conversations about whether or not he was the Antichrist. Listen, there were no other voices. I had been taught from birth, basically, which news sources were honest and which I was absolutely not to trust. I can't believe birtherism was a thing. I had to travel around the world and meet people who were different than anyone that I had ever known to start having my views challenged. The cracks and fissures in my belief were incredibly painful, and I was very well indoctrinated. But as all of the new viewpoints and information sank in, one of the first things to go was my concept of patriotism, or rather my definition of it. Because what I thought was patriotism up to that point in my life actually wasn't.
A globalist is a person that wants the globe to do well, frankly, not caring about our country so much. And you know what? We can't have that. You know, they have a word. It sort of became old-fashioned. It's called a nationalist. And I say, really, we're not supposed to use that word. You know what I am? I'm a nationalist, okay? I'm a nationalist.
I really hate the word agenda. I think it's just because it has so often been used to imply conspiracy, and it does a lot of heavy lifting when you use it to create monoliths out of groups of people who might not believe the same things at all. To ascribe an agenda to a group is a great way to obfuscate real insight into what they might actually want. However, political parties do have agendas, or they wouldn't be a party. In fact, they're supposed to write them down. But regardless of what is or isn't on a party platform, in the end, the agenda of a party is usually to make its donors money. It's why there are lobbies and why there are rules about how politicians are supposed to accept money, and why they're not well enforced. And if your party is unafraid to apply the term nationalist to itself, then it's probably a good indicator that obtaining money and power at the expense of those they deem outsiders is on the agenda. If patriotism is devotion to and support for your country, then volunteering at a homeless shelter can be patriotic. Community organizing and political involvement is patriotic. Donating to a worthy cause. It's patriotic to care about the people in your country who are being kept poor, so Jeffy Boy can build a rocket and pierce the womb of the cosmos. Those could be some strange babies. But it wasn't patriotism that caused the war on terror, created our cruel and inhumane border camps, or that led to the January 6th insurrection. Patriotism doesn't require subjugation of others, doesn't need to create an outgroup to exclude or compete with, or feel any need to gloss over or hide its own past shortcomings. It doesn't need to pretend it's perfect or better than anyone else. But nationalism, that one's different. Nationalism, noun. identification with one's own nation and support for its interests, especially to the exclusion or detriment of the interests of other nations. It wasn't until 17th century England that it became commonplace for people to equate civilization with their nationality. As societies became more individualized, people stopped associating their states with figureheads and monarchs. Until the age of nationalism in the late 18th century, political allegiance had not been based on your nationality at all. For instance, if you were a Christian in the Middle Ages, Christendom itself was seen as your civilization, wherever it was located. Later on, it became about adherence to great civilizations of the past, such as Greece or Rome, or whichever nation it was that invented Pig Latin. The only other tongue in which Ae Avhe achieved a luency fe huste arfe. Nationalism, translated into world politics, implies the identification of the state or nation with the people, or at least the desirability of determining the extent of the state according to ethnographic principles. In the age of nationalism, but only in the age of nationalism, the principle was generally recognized that each nationality should form a state, its state, and that the state should include all members of that nationality. Patriotism allows you to be critical of the times that your own country has failed, and it lets you work to improve upon them in the future. But nationalism tries to cover up or reframe these failures, and even as progress of some kind. The difference between patriotism and nationalism is that the patriot is proud of his country for what it does, and the nationalist is proud of his country no matter what it does. The first attitude creates a feeling of responsibility, but the second, a feeling of blind arrogance that leads to war. Okay, so check this out. George Orwell, yes, that George Orwell, wrote an essay called Notes on Nationalism, which you can read down below in the description. It's for free, it's not that long, and you absolutely should because he's got some amazing quotes. Here's one. The nationalist not only does not disapprove of atrocities committed by his own side, he has a remarkable capacity for not even hearing about them. While I find some points in this essay to be really insightful for understanding how dangerous an ideology nationalism is to fall into, I also don't intend to apologize for what reads to me as an eagerness to engage in stereotyping and racism. If you're up for it, though, I'd love for you to read it and let me know in the comments what you thought, but consider this as a content warning as well. For an amazing explainer on the difference between these two concepts, I think Mr. Beat's video, The Difference Between Nationalism and Patriotism, is just about the best there is on YouTube. It's the clearest elucidation I found on this important distinction, and it's just one of the dozens of incredible examples of clearly explained social studies and government videos on his channel. Highly recommended. I'm a patriot, and if you don't like it, then go f yourself. God, every time I say it, I feel so scummy. In high school, one of my favorite books was called Wild at Heart, and it was important to me because it did a great job of twisting around verses in the Bible to let me still be a fun-loving, sex-crazed maniac, and told me that it was okay that I woke up most days with so much testosterone surging through my teenage veins that fucking and fighting were just about all I could wrap my brain around. It didn't justify those actions, but it did loosen the bounds of the actual scriptures enough to let me feel okay with just being a human being a little bit. I'm bringing this up because while I have read many of the teachings of Jesus himself as actually being radically loving, concerned with helping the needy, and very socialistic, read it, I'm serious, that's not how it's used by Christian nationalists. That's right, I finally said it. Christian nationalists are concerned with preserving their way of life. Powerful people are telling them that dangerous foreigners and evil liberals want to take that away from them. And as long as that fear can be stoked, the Bible can be twisted into whatever form they need it to keep that power. After all, the Bible really isn't that long. But if enough people tell you that it's really hard to understand that you can be a good Christian without reading the whole thing anyway, and if you get enough ministers and preachers teaching you all kinds of different ways to pick out little pieces that you can use to make it say different things, regardless of how the original authors might have intended it to be read by their original audience, then it starts to make some sense how Christianity, just like countless other belief systems, continue to be co-opted by social and political movements to justify their agendas, and maybe even to twist the definitions of words like patriotism to smuggle in ideas that suit their interests. A fixation on the military, national defense, cultural homogeneity. Of course I'm going to talk about Reagan. Because where I grew up and where I live now and all across the South, people still idolize Reagan. They were taught that he fought for them, and he did. The war on drugs was and still is fought for white people who felt threatened by people of other ethnicities and cultures to attempt to secure their way of life. Using Christianity to justify conservative positions kept the moral majority in the majority and armed with a cudgel to boot. The problem is that in these more isolated parts of the country, it can be all too easy to be cut off from the voices of other marginalized groups who are suffering preventable oppression. They're given license to wear industrial-strength rose-colored glasses as their nostalgia is weaponized. They're told if we could just achieve that perfect America of the past, the one where the Civil War, Native American removal, women's suffrage, and the civil rights movement never actually happened, then we'd have that perfect past back again. I understand wanting things to go back to the times when you felt happiest, but nationalist politicians are using that nostalgia to manipulate you into supporting hateful and discriminatory policies that make them money and dehumanize those who dissent. And it's working. Otherwise, that patriotic bumper sticker wouldn't be displayed so proudly. I want to stress again that I don't think that every conservative thinks in these terms necessarily, but I still want to tell you that I'm not trying to insult you, even if I disagree. So how did the correct response to a heinous terrorist attack become just to go to church, keep shopping, and send your children overseas to fight a bloody war and overthrow a government? I would argue that it became that way because patriotism, simple love and devotion to your country, is not enough to keep the rich in power, the illusion of a middle class alive, and America on top of the world. You need more than that. You need to believe that people who are different than you or who live somewhere else want something that you have, and that they might be willing to harm you to get it. You need to convince them to become nationalists. It is super fun to spend money, but that's not why I do it. I do it for the troops, whose psyches are being irreversibly damaged right now while they look for Saddam's hidden and certainly not imaginary nuclear weapons. Shopping is just what the good Lord intended for us to do, so get a job and get spending. And if you don't like it, then go fuck yourself. I don't mean to belabor this point to death, but the town that I grew up in was full of loving, genuinely caring people. My pointing out these ideological issues that I have are not meant as pronouncement on people's entire character. We're more complex than that. We all have good and bad ideas, and having bad ideas doesn't make you a bad person necessarily, because we all have the ability to change our minds, improve, consider other viewpoints. In fact, I'd argue that as responsible people, we have a duty to examine our beliefs and change them when we find contradictions. And that's all I mean to do here. I'm making this video because I've changed my mind a lot in the past couple of years, and I'm sure that I will do so more in the future. I'm hoping that if you find this video confrontational in some way, that you're able to receive it as nothing more than a criticism of what I see as a harmful set of ideas, not as a condemnation of the people who hold them. If you grew up in a similar situation as me, or have changed your mind about the ideas you had growing up, I know that our growing community would love to hear about it in the comments below. And as for bumper sticker guy? Well, I mean, as a white, able-bodied cis male who grew up in rural Oklahoma, I personally only find it kind of annoying. But for all the reasons we've talked about in this video and many more, I can scarcely imagine how that bumper sticker would make you feel if you belonged to just about any other group of people who weren't born with the same privilege and raised in the same environment that I was. So yeah, I think it's a pretty shitty bumper sticker. Hey, I'm so grateful to all of you who subscribed over the past couple of weeks. I never thought that I would be sharing this kind of stuff on the internet, and it's super scary, but I think it's a good thing, and I'm happy to have you here, and I want to talk about it more. But first, my next video is just going to be much lighter. I'm going to be talking about one of my all-time favorite cartoons and how it addresses ageism. And it's super positive, and I couldn't be more excited. I'd love it if you subscribed and shared this with your friends, though please do so kindly, as I'm sure there are some who would be less open to this content than others. And also, please be kind to one another in the comments section. I know it gets heated, but shit does not get solved down there. Anyway, till next time, See you later, alligators. Why did I do this?
Something about the way you strut your stuff up. Oh, girl, you're fine.